Welcome, welcome, welcome. Part of our continuing series where we talk to reporters, writers, professors, activists, strategists, anybody who can think, anybody who's educated, anybody who can speak intelligently on the state of political division in America today. We're going to be talking with Matthew Klink. My brother's name is Matthew, so near and dear to my heart. Let me introduce you to Matthew Klink so you can see a little bit about who he is. Matthew Klink is a partner at California Strategies. This is the article that I found him in. California's secession has no credibility, but the anger is real. He specializes in running strategic crisis communications, issues management, public affairs programs, and political campaigns. He has more than 3 decades of experience working on complex, controversial issues for the public and private sector. During the last decade, Klink has worked on some of California's most high-profile and expensive political issues with an 80% success rate. Throughout his career, Matt has worked for numerous heavily regulated and taxed clients encompassing a range of industries, including automotive, cable, energy, fast-moving consumer goods, etc. Additionally, Klink has worked on candidate and initiative campaigns at multiple levels of government, where he's performed roles that include general consulting, campaign management, media consulting, campaign spokesperson. Wow, you're really, really well experienced at this game. He's an adept communicator, skilled at crafting and implementing strategic campaigns, risk management, and crisis communication programs. He has substantial experience integrating grassroots outreach and alliance development efforts to support lobbying activities. An award-winning writer, Klink has developed effective messaging and captivating copy, including targeted direct email or mail, speeches, brochures, and op-eds. Skilled at working with the press, he's been a spokesperson and primary media contact for numerous corporate and trade association clients and statewide initiative campaigns. Some of his experience includes working as the Director of Global Government Affairs for Philip Morris International, based in Switzerland. He's also led a team that created and executed communications and stakeholder outreach programs on regulatory and fiscal issues in more than 35 countries and 6 continents. If you go to Matt's LinkedIn page, there he is. He's been on TV a bunch of times, award-winning political consultant. He's a sought-after public speaker and political commentator, award-winning political consultant who assists clients facing complex fiscal and regulatory issues. Speaker, spokesperson, political commentator, analyst on national television based out of Los Angeles, California. Finally, this is on the California Strategies main page. He's been there for about 5 years. His clients encompassing a wide range of industries and subjects, but particularly those companies, trade associations, nonprofits, which face challenging regulatory and fiscal issues. It's a continuation there. You can see Matt at California Strategies or at LinkedIn, and this is a little bit of his detail at California Strategies. Matt, did I say anything wrong? Was there anything we got? I have to do this. I have to introduce you, and then I have to go. Did I get anything wrong after we?
No, you're spot on. The only thing that I will add is that I'm a partner at California Strategies, which is the lion's share of my professional work. I'm also an owner of my own company called Klink Campaigns that does different work than California Strategies, but similar in the sense that it focuses around political issues, but it's just different in the types of clients that I take. But no, you hit it on the head, and I've been doing this for a long time before I had gray hair. And you've been doing it a long time when they call you a veteran political consultant.
Yeah, fair enough. But I mean, you have a strong resume, like one of those soldiers who's done 5 or 6 combat tours in different continents. Very impressive. Before we move on, I want to point out Matt's background. He has the Obama poster. If you look on the other side, he has a Ronald Reagan poster. Above Reagan is JFK, and I think you said there was another. Oh, there's W. Bush.
I collect 2 things. I collect baseball cards, which is a whole nother obsession. But I do collect campaign posters. So I have the iconic Obama Hope. I say there are a couple of Reagans back there. To my left are Kennedy and Roosevelt, and to my right is an LBJ, all the way with LBJ from 1964. So it's fun habit. My wife makes me put it in my office so that my political art doesn't clutter up the house with her art. So, but yeah, that's it's something that I've collected for a while. I'm very proud of it.
Wow. Okay. I wanted to call that out just so everyone can see that. Give me 1 second here. Okay. So we'll start with the basics. We'll get into the article on California, but first, I'm assuming you're an American citizen and you have lived in America your whole life and you've been around for a little while?
Well, I am an American citizen. I have lived in America my whole life, except for the 3.5 years I lived in Lausanne, Switzerland, when I was working for Philip Morris International.
Right.
But, it doesn't mean that just because my location didn't mean that I take off my red, white, and blue. So, nope, I'm a very proud American. I believe that we are the greatest country in the world, bar none. And very, very proud of that.
And how long have you lived in California?
I was born in Hollywood, believe it or not. So 57 years, 58 in April. And aside from, managing a congressional race in Austin, Texas, graduate school in Washington, D.C., I always seem to gravitate back toward the Golden State, largely because of family and friends. But, it's how can you not love 70 degrees and sunny when it's, which is a consistent temperature in Los Angeles?
Well, yeah, and the people and the culture and the food and the art and just the vibrance.
Oh yeah, there's that too.
I've traveled America. It's
no, I agree. I've been to 48 U.S. states, and there's, California, for all its problems, also has many, many benefits.
Well, let me ask you that. You've traveled to 48 states. California is just like Iowa, Kentucky, Missouri, Mississippi, or were something substantially unique and different, in your opinion?
Well, I've never really spent a consistent amount of time there. I will tell you, though, that I am a creature of the big city. So living in Los Angeles or, going to school for graduate school in Washington, D.C., or undergraduate at the University of California at Berkeley, I am more comfortable with large metropolitan areas, not only for the diversity and the cultural aspect, but just from the noise and the hustle and bustle and the fast pace of life. It was a cultural difference when I was living in Lausanne, Switzerland, a quaint little town of, I think at the time it was 180,000 people. And it was a much slower pace of life. I can tell you that I do look at friends that live in suburban Virginia or in other parts of the United States. And for, what I paid for my house 25 years ago, they have a very, very large house on a very, very large piece of property with better public schools, good roads, public safety. So, I mean, look, I think that, as I acknowledged in that article that we want to get to later, California has some fundamental problems, I think, that are largely due to one party rule. And that's not a partisan comment. I think that a healthy divide and healthy questioning is essential in government. And when any party, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, rules the roost for 20 plus years, people get lazy, people get comfortable. And look at what's happening in my hometown of Los Angeles. I mean, we have a homeless problem. They've spent billions of dollars and it's gotten, they say it's getting better. It is okay, 1% to 2% better. That still is, for the amount of money spent, we wanted to see some major progress. Crime, home prices, electricity prices. So, California needs a reboot substantially. But, I think the larger question at hand, though, is, you wanted to talk about, political dissatisfaction and divisive politics. I think we can look at what's happening in Southern California right now. We're mostly Democrats in Southern California, and we have divisive politics because the status quo has failed.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the two things I've heard out of LA is that with a lot of it started with the Palisades fire. And then you had the reservoir wasn't there, and basically the effort to shut it down was incompetent, I think is a safe word to say. And people seem to blame Mayor Bass, who was not supposed to be out of the country at the time that she was, which is known as fire season. And then she did that horrible interview. You're asking her questions and she just froze like a scared 2-year-old. Then we can look at Gavin Newsom, and pretty horrible response when they asked him about the Palisades fire. And the first thing out of his mouth was, "Don't blame me, not my problem, local issue. I'm going to be run as president. I don't want to be worried about it." And one of the things I always bring up is, for all of Schwarzenegger's problems, whenever there was a disaster, that guy was on the ground in hours.
Yeah.
On the ground in hours, meeting everybody, no gloves on, shaking hands, hugging, giving out blankets. I'm not endorsing all of his policies, but I'm just saying, wow, what a different reaction to somebody who says, "I'm going to be there and be a leader," versus somebody who says, "Don't blame me. Don't look at me.
I know.
Don't call me."
And I think you're right, though, when you're saying that, all LA, I mean, look, Karen Bass didn't need to have answers when she jumped off that airplane and was interviewed by that reporter. All she literally had to say was, "What has just happened is horrible. It needs to be, I'm here to help. And that's where I'm going. And in fact, I'm leaving right now to do that." Instead of just stand there with a microphone in her face and say nothing for 90 seconds. And Gavin Newsom too, the beauty of being a chief executive, whether you're a governor, a mayor, or the president, is that you are also the consoler in chief. And if Gavin Newsom had said what happened is abhorrent, it's a complete tragedy, we are going to make it right, but it's going to take some time, I think a lot of people would have given him the benefit of the doubt and said, okay, he's on it. And look, that's just a problem right now in general, is that I think that there is that's not even an accurate statement. I was going to say, depending upon where you sit is where you stand. But I think, look, in California and in Southern California, they are all Democrats. They voted overwhelmingly for Gavin Newsom and for Karen Bass. I mean, Karen Bass spent $7 million and won by 10 points over a guy that spent $107 million for election in 2022. So she has brought, 10 points in a two-person race. That's a lot. I mean, you can't say, "Oh, if we had dropped one more mail piece, we could have done this." I mean, Trust me, when I've worked on enough campaigns, I would much rather lose by 10 than lose by 2, because you lose by 2 and you kick yourself. Oh my gosh, if I had just done that last email, or if I had done some more press conferences or some more rallies, maybe we could have squeezed out a couple thousand more votes. And the problem is that Karen Bass, she's run in races that she's never really had competition.
There you go.
So
there it is.
Because of that, she's never really had to focus on accomplishments.
Right there.
And that, I mean, look, that's what happened in the California legislature. That's what happened when she was in Congress. And it's what happens now when she's mayor. And the same with Gavin Newsom. He's never faced a tough race. And I think that it doesn't. And Kamala Harris is the classic example.
Thank you. I've been saying that for years. Nobody believes me. I'm like, look at her career in California. She never actually ran a real race against a real opponent. That one woman put on a Native American headdress, and then she just talked about how don't be racist like her, and that's how she won a race. There was no discussion of policies. Almost everybody's completely forgotten about that in California.
I agree. I mean, except for her first race for Attorney General against Steve Cooley, who was the LA County District Attorney at the time. She underperformed in that race too. But the Democratic voter registration edge is so large in California that even they could accommodate her errors to win. I mean, and look, there are other states where Republicans run the roost. They have the same problem. If you show me a politician who runs in a 53-47, 52-48 district, they get it. They understand that you have to. I want a politician who is close enough to center that they can touch it. I prefer them to be right of center, but left of center. But I mean, look at Bill Clinton. I did a TV interview yesterday, and they said to me, what hope do the Democrats have? And I said, well, they're at their lowest point in terms of party favorability since 1992. Well, what happened in 1992? An ill-dressed, overweight a Democratic governor from the state of Arkansas decided to throw his hat into the ring and run for president. And he captured lightning in a bottle. And January of 2023, President Bill Clinton was sworn into office. Now, I'm not saying that the Democrats need to find a new Bill Clinton. Well, they do actually, or that one is even out there. But the Republicans would be foolish to say we control everything. So 2026, we're expected to lose some seats, but we're good in 28. History would show that that's not the case. When you control the keys to everything, you got to get stuff done, or nationally, the voters will hold you accountable. In California, they don't, because the Republican Party, until the last couple of years ago, they were actually the third largest party in California, behind decline to state.
Yeah. So this, just to get to everybody, so California is a one-party state. It's roughly been since the end of the Governor Schwarzenegger term. Under Schwarzenegger, he was surrounded by a bunch of Democrats, and they changed the way primaries are run to what they call a jungle primary. They said that was a way to strengthen the political system. What that did was wiped out all third parties. If you talk to anybody in the Green Party, Libertarian, they're like, that was the death knell for us. Secondly, it set it up to where you can have Democrat run Democrat. And they kind of convinced the Republicans this was a way to make it that you can beat all the third parties. That's not the way that it worked out. It was Dem versus Dem, and the Republicans basically signed their own death warrant. They're effectively a dead party now. It's a one-party state. And the governor, who was a Republican, did that. So they kind of did it to themselves. And it goes back to 2010. Things haven't been better since. And yeah, you have a lot of problems like homelessness that aren't fixed, like $2 billion in COVID funds went to prisoners under Gavin Newsom, or things like that. And there's no fiscal regulatory arm anymore that has enough power to say, hey, what are we doing? I'm old enough to remember that. And that's wiped out. It's gone. Unfortunately, the Republicans partly did it to themselves by aligning with Donald Trump in 2016. They were already going down, and then they changed the regulation. And then in 2016, they said, let's attach ourselves to a guy that terrifies the feces out of 75% of the population. That'll be a good political move. I think you saw how that worked out with San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer. That guy could have been governor. All they had to do was show Californians a picture of him standing next to Trump. Permanently ruined his career for the rest of his life. So, well,
and he also ran in a recall election, which
and the first thing they did was hold up a picture of him and Trump. The first thing they did, they didn't say anything else. They go, look, him and Trump.
Yeah, and in California, that's just the kiss of death.
That's over. Yeah. So, well, I'm sorry, but Trump came in and, he said Mexicans are rapists, and he wanted to ban Muslims. That goes against the concept of America from 1776. Then there was arresting protesters. A lot of people were terrified. And then in that moment to go, hey, let's back the guy who literally scares people. I don't know how that was a smart political move. Like, you thought, hey, we'll ride this out. It'll go away. People will get over it. I think we're 12 years later. People are not over their anger of Trump in California. That's not dissipated one bit.
Although I will tell you, he did better in 2024 than he did in 2016.
Absolutely. He did a lot better with Latin people. He got a lot of Latin voters, and he got some more minority voters in California. That's exactly what happened with the recall election. So I'm Latino. A lot of people said, Mark, Trump taking over California. No. Latin people voted against Newsom in the recall election, not because they liked being called rapists, but because the Democratic Party effectively shut down the economy during COVID, said you can't go to work, get your PPP loans. Most Latin people are individual business owners. Some of them are undocumented. They don't know how to do the paperwork, or they can't file for the paperwork. So they were literally told, don't work and suffer. That's why a bunch of them went against their normal Democratic voting base in the recall election. I've had to point this out to a lot of people. Everybody's been blind to the fact Latin people already did this in California a few years ago. They're just repeating the thing here. They want to work. And for whether right or wrong, they see Trump as the open the economy jobs, and the Democrats as the stay home and how dare you ask to go out and work.
Yeah.
That's a lot of what that is. I haven't seen Latin people say, you know what, I love being called a rapist. And I think a guy who has a vice presidential pick who won his election race on a TV commercial saying, do you hate Mexicans? That makes me feel warm in my heart. And then when Donald Trump says he's the nominated president, he wants to reenact the Eisenhower deportation ban, which was technically called Operation Wetback, which is the most racist term you can have for Latin people. It's not, I don't think they're siding with being called wetbacks and siding with, people who say, I hate you. I think it's about jobs and economics. Just my opinion.
No. I think that the data would support you on that people tend to vote their own self-interest, and they realize, look, Kamala Harris, in my opinion, lost the 2024 election when she went on that show, The View.
Yep.
And when they asked her the question, what would you do differently than Joe Biden? And she said nothing. That was like the moment in 1980 when they asked Edward Kennedy what the first thing he would do as president was, and he couldn't answer it. And I think that most Americans, or a plurality of Americans, realized that Kamala Harris had no clue of what she wanted to do. All she ran on was, I'm not Trump. And, and also the flip side of that is that, and this actually leads us right into the topic that I think you want to talk about, is using terms of dictator and fascist and, overusing the term Adolf Hitler and calling Trump voters deplorable and despicable and uneducated. I think that, look, whether you like him or not, and even in 2020, he got 74 million American votes.
Yeah.
So that's flat out insulting. But even the most partisan Democrat, you may hate Donald Trump. He's no dictator. It's impossible for an American president to ever be a dictator because of our system of government. But if you go too far with hostile rhetoric, you're going to get pushback, not only from the opposite party, but even from the thinking people in your own party. And it just turned people off. That, coupled with if the economics were good for Biden and Harris, she probably would have squeaked by and gotten elected.
Sure.
But the economics were bad. Couple that with the rhetoric, and I think that she was turning the wrong people away.
Well, so you have, I'm not a big Trump fan, but the guy got shot at, right? And they couldn't give him any sympathy. And they kept up talking about how he's Hitler and stuff. And some people were pointing out, maybe calling someone Hitler encourages people who aren't emotionally stable to get out there with a gun and attack someone.
Yep.
And I watched liberal news say, no, there's nothing to that. Any violence that's coming is because of Trump himself. Only Trump used violent language. So we Democrats calling him Hitler and the end of America and an existential threat and the loss of everything we need. Of course, that doesn't incite anybody to violence because we didn't technically use violent rhetoric. Therefore, all violence is because of Trump alone and has nothing to do with us. And they just pounded that home after an assassination attempt. And I'm like, do you think that's a good idea?
Yeah.
Do you think that's a good, the guy almost got his head blown off and you want to be as, no, I don't buy it. And no, that we had nothing to do with this and we need no soul searching. And let's just pile on fuel on the fire as possibly as recklessly as possible right after a guy almost got shot. I'm like, you think no one's going to notice that?
No, look, I agree with you. And that the thing that is most interesting in all of this too, is that there was a fundamental disconnect primarily from the Democrats, and the Republicans got it in 2024. People consume their news differently now. Mm-hmm. You can't turn on, there's no Walter Cronkite to be the definitive voice of what American thought should be. Yeah. And there is, look, case in point is this podcast that I'm on right now. Is, you have an audience that you cater to, they look to you for information. Well, magnify that with Joe Rogan, with Megyn Kelly, with, a number of others. And the Republicans went on, and Kamala's big flaw was not going on Joe Rogan. I don't think it would have turned the election for her, but the fact that she chickened out and then she went on a podcast that catered to people she already had in her camp. What was it, that the one woman's podcast?
Call My Daddy.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Exactly. You know, that was an easy one. I mean, look, Joe Rogan was a Democrat until like 3 or 4 years ago when I think COVID swung him.
I'll just say, I'm not going to go into it. Look up how Call My Daddy became famous, the episode that they did to become famous, and then ask yourself if that's an appropriate venue for announcing a female presidential candidate. I'll just leave it there. I'm not going to go into detail. You can Google that and then ask that question yourself. I'm horrified by it because I have a niece and I don't want her to watch that and go, well, why don't I as a politician and then go on a show that advocates whatever they did. I'll leave it there. You're right. Edward R. Murrow's dead. Cronkite's dead. People get their news in silos. I've interviewed about 200 professors. All of them say that. And what scares me is that when you talk to professors of political science, there is no agreement on what the cause for division is. They have different theories. Yeah. And then within that, they have different theories on how to fix it. So there's no agreement on what the cause is. There's no agreement on the solution to the cause. And then when you burrow down and you go, okay, you've been studying this solution. Can you tell me this will definitively work at making America better? Right there. All of them will go, they'll do this. I hope.
Yeah. I mean, look, that's the problem. I mean, I've studied it, not to the PhD level, but I mean, look, America was set up as a divided nation. If you want to go back far, right? I mean, you had big state versus small state. You had, which was, that's the reason why we're a republic and not a pure democracy. Moving forward, you have, one of the reasons. I'm oversimplifying a little bit.
I get it.
I saw that. Yeah, I agree with you there. It's a little more complex, but I mean, look, you still have, obviously you have racial tensions. You still have, geographic differences. I mean, look, you have the Civil War, which was, fought, even though Nikki Haley didn't initially say it was fought over slavery. And you can then pull back and you say, well, it was agricultural versus the cities. Yeah, because the South was making all their money on cheap slave labor and the North was prospering from it. So, I mean, but you look at that. I mean, look, I read a fantastic book about Congress from like 1830 to right before the Civil War. You want to talk about caustic. There were canings on the House floor and members they finally passed a gentleman's agreement because there were no women in Congress at the time that if you were going to duel, you could duel in the District of Columbia. So they would go out into Virginia or Maryland and duel.
Sure, but how long ago was that? Everybody brings up the caning. Tell the audience, when was
like
the
1850. Caning? It's not that long ago,
1850, we're talking pre-Civil War.
Correct. So, but then you fight the Civil War and then, and then you have arguably the most corrupt election ever. What was it? I think it was 1872, where Samuel Tilden actually won the election, but Rutherford B. Hayes was able to cut a deal with the National Democratic Party to remove Union troops from the South as part of the Reconstruction to take over the presidency. So that then creates the modern Democratic Party with the Ku Klux Klan and Jim Crow laws. And then, so I mean, the bottom line is there has always been, I mean, look, Samuel Douglas called Abraham Lincoln a monkey when they were debating, which was scandalous in those times.
Yeah.
The only difference I'll say now between now and then, we've always had divisive rhetoric. The problem right now is that everybody has a megaphone. So there's no filter anymore. It doesn't take 2 weeks for the newspaper to reach, a speech in Washington, D.C. to reach my small town. And it's instant reaction and instant response. And as you were saying, is that people silo their news information. And look, I don't think that it's ultimately healthy, but it's not going to break up American society in the long run. And I believe that we're arguing over this stuff because there's not something that's big enough for everybody to unite around. And that would be God, and that would be, God forbid, a war that not just, not where we're launching cruise missiles or we're drone attacking people, where there are American women and men on the ground in a foreign country at a bigger than Afghanistan, like a Korean War or a Vietnam War, although that was divisive as well. So, but there's, I mean, look, we argue over small stuff now. Yes, it's important that, boys shouldn't play in girls' sports, etc. But in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't affect that many people. But we argue over it, and we make a mountain or make a molehill into a mountain. I just think that it's just because, look, Americans are still, if you are poor in America, you are not that bad off compared to poor in the rest of the world. I mean, we won the geographic gene pool by being born in America. Where was it? I think, where 3 in 4 don't have access to clean water around the world. I mean, I know that there are places in Central California where people are forced to shower in parking lots and drink bottled water. But I'll say to you, Marcus, in the world's 5th largest economy, the fact with the most recipients of government aid in California, I'd say that that's just an abject failure of leadership more than divisive rhetoric. So go ahead. I'll let you talk. I've been babbling.
No, I love everything you said. But I would like to present to you stuff that I've heard from other people, if that's okay.
Please. No, I'd love it. What I was going to ask you, what have you heard from people that are studying this?
So we'll go with the GDP higher than other nations. So if you go to Google and you look up GDP by state compared to other nations, about 3/5 of American states have a GDP equivalent to Central Latin America or Central African country. So they're not actually doing on their own that great. Additionally, there was the UN Special Rapporteur in 2014, I believe, with Obama's presidency, who extensively traveled America and said many parts of the South are equivalently as poor off as a third world country. So we have 2 data points showing that, especially a lot of the South, some of the Midwest, they're not richer than Central American countries or Central African countries. And we have reports by the UN saying that some of the living standards of them, especially during Obama's period, was horrible. And that was the good, competent president. People would look at that. Additionally, when we go to existential threat, that goes back to Ronald Reagan, right? He said, this is what I've heard, if space aliens attacked us, we'd all come together. That was a Reagan thing. A lot of professors point at that and go, existential threat can bring us together. The question I have is, 2001 was a terrorist attack, and it did bring Americans together for a few months. And then we started turning on each other about the cause. Then you had the Afghan war. We weren't solidified on that. Then you had the Iraq war. We weren't solidified on that. Then you had the Vietnam War. We weren't solidified on that. Then you had the war on terror. We weren't solidified on that. Then you had the Ukraine war, and we're divided on that. You got to go back to World War II to find one where we were like, yeah, we're on board this. The last couple ones didn't do it. So some professors question, are we going to react to an existential threat? Because when Russia was invading Ukraine, that should have brought everybody together in some of their opinion, and it didn't.
Should it, though?
In their opinion, was that we were trained as an American people to fight Russia. It's an existential threat, democracy, trying to conquer Europe, etc.
Do you have kids? You ask a question. I have 2 boys.
Sure.
And I've been to Kyiv 4 times, and I've spoken. Oh, wow. And I've spoken in Kyiv 4 times, or twice. I'm sorry, twice. And I visited the other 2 times. But I was doing work there. I would not want my sons to fight and die for Ukraine. Look, if you look at, and I was a Russian history major in college. I mean, if you look at that part of the world, Ukraine, that's where, Stalin slaughtered 30 million people by starving them, pre-World War II. Then they got hammered by the Germans. Then they got hammered by the Nazis or by the Russians afterward. But before that, Ukraine has fluctuated between independence, part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, part of the Russian Empire. So, no, I don't think that Ukraine should never be in the EU and they should never be in NATO. I mean, look, they are at their core a corrupt country that until Russia attacked, even the mainstream media was talking about how corrupt Ukraine was.
Oh, yeah.
Vladimir Zelensky, he ain't no Winston Churchill, put it that way. So,
yeah.
I mean, I know that's, shame on you. I mean,
I'm not. You say whatever you want. I don't care. Say whatever you want about Ukraine.
What he's doing is noble. But no, to your larger point, though, about it would have to be something pretty significant from an existential standpoint, in part because voices of dissent, even though they might be small, they have the ability to turn it up loud just because they have so many more ways to disseminate their messages.
Right. It would have to be pretty large. I'm just pointing out that we haven't had an existential threat that was able to successfully bring Americans together in, I think, 80 years.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Close to a century. And then World War II was it. But if you go back to World War I, World War I was incredibly divisive in America.
Sure.
So that's kind of like a blip where World War II happened and we all came together. Yeah, I'll just say with Ukraine, look up the corruption index for Ukraine before 2014. It was the only country in the world that had Central African levels of corruption outside of Africa, period. It was the only one. That's a fact. I'm not taking a stance. I'm just putting that out there.
Yep.
Also, you can look up the U.S. State Department listed the one of the military brigades of the Ukrainians as, quote, white ISIS. I'm not making that up. That was the U.S. State Department called some of the guys they called neo-Nazis in the Ukraine military, and they referred to them as white ISIS. So you can look up the U.S. State Department looking at the Ukrainian military, and I forget the name of the group, and they refer to them as white ISIS, which I got to tell you, as a brown-skinned person, makes me feel all sorts of wonderful to know that we're shipping weapons of mass destruction to a group that's dedicated to white supremacy on the face of the planet, and that my tax dollars went to that. I mean, it makes me feel warm inside. It does. And the Holodomor, which was the Ukrainian genocide, was horrible. By the way, Stalin got that idea from the English, who did it to the Irish with the potato famine. You won't hear that. Starving people and committing genocides was kind of popular in the 1920s to 1933 region. But let's go to now. Some of the people are saying, you're right. We've always been divisive. I think it was John Adams or someone. When John Adams was running, one of them called the other guy a transvestite. That was in a newspaper back then in the late 1700s, 1800s. Very divisive. What I see people bringing up is that, there's a lot of metrics that they're looking at. So dating, people dating across political parties is the lowest it's ever been. So it's gone from, I think, about 12% or something who wouldn't date across political parties to like 30, 45%. And it's done that in the last 7 years. So people are looking at that going, well, that's a hard metric. That's bad. You also have surveys by the University of Virginia, Crystal Ball Center for Politics, which is very reputable. And when Biden was running against Trump, they did a poll. It was basically 80% of all Biden voters viewed all Trump voters as, quote, an existential threat to America. And about 78% of all Trump voters viewed all Biden voters as an existential threat to America. Language reserved for a Russian nuclear strike or an ISIS terrorist attack. Pretty bad. And they were saying that's never happened before. And then we're looking at landslide election counties. So a landslide election counties where, like you were talking about, I want to win a race by 10 percentage points, right? I don't want to win by 2. I want to win by 10. Landslide election counties where when you have a presidential election, one candidate wins by 20 to 30 percentage points over the other. So there's just no point even running there. Like don't even try. If you go back to the 1990s, it was about a third of America was a landslide election county, where this is Democrat country. This is Republican country. Don't even bother running a race here. You're not going to try win. Now they're saying it's 80%.
Yeah.
So when people are looking at that, that's related to a concept called the big sort, which says we've been sorting ourselves out into ideologically sympathetic communities since the 1990s, literally by people moving and rearranging across themselves. That theory says that that level of division can't be undone unless you move everybody back, which would be a generational project. So what would you say to people who are looking at hard statistics and saying, we know for a fact that people aren't dating across parties to dramatic degrees. We know for a fact that most of the country now is a landslide election county, and presidential candidates really don't have a chance to compete. And we know for a fact that people are using really divisive language against each other for the first time in surveys. Additionally, some people consider what happened on January 6th to be an insurrection. Not everybody, okay. But we haven't had anybody storm the Capitol since 1812. What would you say to these statistics and people who point at these and go, that seems bad. That seems like we're not going in a good direction and things aren't normal. Also point out lowest faith in Congress, I think, in 60 years.
Yeah. Yet the congressional reelect is about 98% or 95%. Yeah.
So why is this all? How do you look at this and go, it's going to be okay, when people are going, we can tell over decades, not just 1 or 2 years, decades, things continuing to get worse, and there's no trend line showing a bounce back. How do we know it's going to be okay?
Well, the simple answer is we don't.
Yeah,
no, I mean, anybody who tells you that everything is going to be hunky-dory, I mean, like anything, it requires work, and what is it? That which gets attention gets resolved. And I think that the fact that we're having this conversation is one way to highlight that. But look, a couple observations, one in terms of dating. I have seen those statistics. I will tell you, I've been married for 28 years to a Democrat. And we have 2 children, both of whom are Democrats. So I guess I'm in a so-called mixed marriage. And we just agree to disagree. I think that the problem that I see more than anything, and I'll address the geography question in a second. The problem that I have talked to students about this when I lecture on colleges is we have come to the point where, you're not my opponent, you're my enemy.
Exactly.
And if that's the case, the rhetoric that you use for that person is intense and is more harsh than it needs to be. I pride myself when I'll go on TV and I try to be cordial to the people with whom I'm speaking, to lead by example. That I don't look, you and I probably don't disagree on, or probably don't agree on everything, or maybe even most things. I don't know you that well, but I respect the fact that you have a right to your opinion.
Yes.
Even though it might be misguided or I disagree with it, and vice versa. But if you start segregating your friends because you like to talk in an echo chamber, that's a problem. I think the other side of that is that school used to be a place where you were exposed to all views. We don't need safe places in schools. We need people to hear things that they don't agree with and learn how to think critically and formulate arguments for and against those things. And look, I didn't go to public school. I went to Catholic school up until college. And okay, I'll tell you one thing: the Jesuits teach you to think critically, and they are by no means conservative. They are social justice, social welfare. They are more progressive in the eyes of the Catholic Church, but they taught us to think critically. And even today in my professional life, I don't just watch Fox News. I listen to CNN, MSNBC, Fox, News Nation. I read New York Times, Wall Street Journal, LA Times, Washington Post. I mix it up. One, it's my job. I need to know what people are saying, but I read stuff from people that are hard left Democrats. And I like, oh my gosh, this person is full of it. But it's well-reasoned, and I learned something. I want to know what the other people are thinking.
Yeah.
We don't have that anymore. In terms of geography, I don't think that people are moving because they're moving to a Republican or a Democrat location. They're moving because they perceive a better quality of life for their family.
Sure.
And there's a reason right now that there is an exodus from California, New York, Washington, Oregon, Massachusetts to Texas, Florida, Utah, Idaho, Montana. Lower taxes, less government regulation, generally speaking, better public schools, and a higher quality of life.
Sure.
And so I think that's more of an effect. But the interesting part of that is the people that are leaving California, for example, they're not bringing their politics with them. They're not bringing their liberal mindset to Texas. They're bringing, they are falling in line and voting with the mores and traditions of the districts to which they're moving. So
I agree with that, but that just proves the point, right?
Well, it proves the point that people are moving for a better quality of life. But the problem that I have right now, more than anything, is we have members of state legislatures and Congress that I will call their workhorses, meaning they keep their nose down, they pass legislation. And then you have other members of Congress and state legislature. They don't care about governing. They use it as a megaphone to drive an agenda that gets people ginned up, and the right does it and the left does it.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the people that are ultimately harmful, that cause harm. Adam Schiff is a case in point of that. But there are, Ted Cruz is an example of that for the Republicans, that they would rather pick a fight than solve a problem.
I agree.
And I think
Marjorie Taylor.
Yeah, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I mean, so I think that the solution here is, look, some of these districts that are 90-10, like how many competitive races has Maxine Waters run? 0.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
And I think that, we've got to find a better way. We need more districts that are closer in party registration, and it's hard in a state like California. But again, if you face no competition, what incentive do you have to compromise?
I totally agree. I just want to say I agree with you on people may not be saying, I want to ideologically move to conservative community or liberal community. The lifestyle appeals to them and they move. There's a lot of evidence for that, but it's still the same effect. You move to an area, it's conservative, you become conservative.
Yeah.
And so we're still seeing the bifurcation of everything. And it still goes back 3 decades. And it still is most of America now, where it wasn't in the 1990s. And the best experts on it say, I don't know how you undo this other than a generational project. And the phrase they use is, quotes, generational project, meaning it takes you, your kids, your grandkids, slowly moving back. And I'm like, okay, so how long does that take to play out? And they go 20 to 30 years. And I go, what if we have January 6th, part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5, part 6, while we're waiting for everything to snap back together? Everything work out?
I am not one who believes that January 6th was an insurrection.
Okay.
I'll tell you why.
Sure.
We put more troops on the ground around the U.S. Capitol than we did when the U.S. evacuated from Afghanistan. They were delayed by 2 hours in casting their vote to certify the 2020 election results. I agree with people. It is a deep stain on America. I think Donald Trump acted abhorrently, and he should have tamped down on it more. However, let's not, it's part of the hyperbole. Oh, I can now claim that I survived the insurrection. It's like, yes, and we'll give you a participation trophy too. It wasn't I mean, suck it up, Buttercup. It wasn't that serious. Nobody, the only person that died was a woman who was shot by a security guard on the U.S. Capitol premises. Other people did die afterward. But that's a stretch to claim that it was from the actual, the incident on January 6th. And I know that that's controversial, but again, more people died in the George Floyd riots than they did in the Capitol riots. So, but again, those were supported by government because that was was that a noble riot? Tell that to the person whose property burned in Minneapolis. oh, it's okay because what happened to George Floyd was wrong, even though my building is now in rubble. They don't care. Again, normal Americans don't care. They don't follow. Most Americans want to live their life, raise their kids, send them to good public schools, and have as little involvement with government as possible. And that's not happening for a lot, particularly in blue states. That's not happening. You have people, I mean, look, I've said this before. Look at the Los Angeles Unified School District, the second largest school district in the United States. It has failed to educate people for 40 plus years. If you want to talk about creating generations of people who don't know how to think critically and whose sole task is how much money can I get from government when I stop working or when I graduate, we have succeeded in Los Angeles. Yet you can't break up the schools. Parents can't send their kids to the school of their choice. Primarily, I would add, in neighborhoods with children that are not white, and yet that is somehow acceptable. I mean, why do you think that the public school population is decreasing? Because people that can afford it are sending their kids to private. So, and again, this is all part of we just need more money. California, you know how much California's budget has grown over the last 20 years? It's almost doubled.
Yeah.
$322 billion is our state budget right now. And yet the majority of our school kids cannot read and cannot do math at grade level. It's not a money problem. The teachers union sucks money out of education, and their primary job is to take care of teachers and administrators. It's not on educating students. And that is a crime. And the politicians who are funded by the teachers unions don't say a damn thing about it.
I'll just point out that per pupil funding for California was equivalent to Louisiana, which was the lowest in America. So despite what the teachers are being paid, we're not putting the amount of money into kids in comparison to the other 50 states. So I'll just leave it there. I do want to ask, okay, if we don't know that it's going to get better, then how do we know it doesn't get worse? If we started the conversation, it was like, America's had a rough and tumble time. I've heard this before. Hey, we've had a tough time. We've survived. But then when I was explaining the metrics to you, you're like, well, and I go, how do we know this gets better and doesn't get worse? And you're like, we don't. So if we don't know it gets better and we can't say it's not going to get worse, how do we know we don't get to a point where the project doesn't work anymore?
That's a really, really, really good question. The simple answer is that I don't think we can definitively know that either, except right now, the overwhelming majority of people believe that, well, America is far from perfect. It still is the best that there is. And you will always have voices on the left and on the right that want to, enact some sort of radical change. I mean, look, there's no secret that I'll put it this way it will illustrate my point. I did a radio show in Arizona last year, and the host said to me, what happens if the Republicans win the House and the Senate and the presidency? And I said, well, his name was John. He subsequently passed. He was one of the lions of Arizona radio, and a Democrat, I might add. I said, well, John, if the Republicans win, the first thing that they do is they abolish the filibuster, and then they make permanent the Trump tax cuts. They evict all illegal immigrants. And he goes, good God, Matt, that would be horrible. And I said, no, John, that's what Democrats do. And if you look at what the Democrats have proposed, 47 of them, as of the last vote, that 47 Democrats voted to get rid of the filibuster in Washington, D.C. And if you want, that would lead to general dissatisfaction, because the country would lurch far left and far right, depending upon who controlled all three branches.
Thank you.
The beauty of the Americans, look, right now, the beauty of the American system is big change is really, really hard. And it was designed that way. The founding father designed this country. Changes generally happen a little bit around the middle. And right now, the pendulum, look, under Joe Biden, all of those wacky policies that he implemented, the pendulum swung too far one way. And it's correcting right now. My guess is that in 26 or 28 or 30, it will swing somewhere back to the center. I mean, look, I say, I go back to 1992. The Democrats were perceived as too far left, so they elected a centrist. First time we balanced the budget in how many decades? I mean, a lot of things that, mind you, with a Republican Congress. So
yeah,
I mean, go ahead.
I do want to ask you about that. So Democrats' least favorability 1992, and then you saw Bill Clinton, and
yep.
The word is moderate. Other people have said that basically Bill Clinton took a few Republican talking points and shoved them into the Democratic Party and said that equals moderatism. And like cutting funding for social programs in order to balance the budget and some of the other things he did with the Republicans. Other people have said that it was basically Newt Gingrich's budget plan, and Clinton had to just basically accept it. And the way he did that was say, it's mine. Just what I've heard. If we're talking to Californians, and we're talking to people who are LGBTQ, transgender, women who feel some way about the loss of Roe v. Wade, Muslims, immigrants, protesters, undocumented Latin people, minorities in general, and they have an existential fear about Trump. Whether that's right or wrong or good or bad.
Right, but it's an emotion. Fear is an emotion and a power.
Absolutely. And then they hear, don't worry, a Democrat's going to come who embraces Trump things and makes them part of the Democratic plan, just like Bill Clinton did in 1992. Is that going to calm them down or make them more scared?
I don't know if it's Trump things. I think it's unquestionable that, I think that support for gay and lesbians' ability to marriage, that's rock solid. That's not going anywhere. You might get some extreme on the right that want to get rid of it. Look, but the stuff about, young men playing in women's sports or forcing girls to share a locker room with both biological boys, that's a 90-10 or an 80-20 issue. So, I mean, I'm sorry, but, compete in the sex that you were born in, not what you think you are. And, so I don't dispute the fact that, but I would counter that for a Democrat, they will always believe in social justice. They will always stand up for people of color in a different way than Republicans will. And I will tell you that Bill Clinton, he did win because he was able to triangulate between the wacky left and the right and the conservative right. I don't necessarily know that any Democrat is going to adopt Trump's ways, but I will tell you that the difference between 1992 and now is that both parties have populist wings in the party that are much more vocal. The problem is that the Democratic populists are represented primarily by an 84-year-old white guy from Vermont, and Bernie Sanders, and the Republicans. Look, Donald Trump has completely reshaped the Republican Party.
True,
it's never going back to the way it was under Ronald Reagan.
Thank you.
But that was 50 years ago. Politics is not static. So, look, I think that. I would love it if AOC and Bernie Sanders keep on talking about issues and are the mainstay of the party. My guess is that someone else will rise to the top. That's going to be. I mean, that's what Gavin Newsom's trying to do right now. He's not. Sometimes he's doing it well, but he is pissing a lot of people off. But
yeah,
I don't think he's going to look. The fact that he came out and said that I don't forget the exact words, but that it's concerning, the thing about boys playing in girls' sports.
Yeah.
That's just common sense. I'm sorry.
Yeah. He also got a massive rebuke from a majority of Californians.
Well, you know what? California doesn't represent the mainstream. Gavin Newsom.
But you were talking about what do people feel? And okay, maybe nationally that's the case. Probably is. But in California, that guy did that and he immediately got spanked. Then he also tried to do the Trump thing where he's like, I just order everybody back to work. That's also getting him spanked. Then he also said, I've never used the word Latinx. That's also getting him.
Oh, well, then they showed it. No, look, Gavin Newsom is look, shocker. Like politicians, he's hypocritical. The problem is that everybody, there are records now that show. I mean, yes, I mean, I have friends that are Latino and Latina, and they go, "Do it ever call me Latinx? It's insulting to me."
Yeah.
I go, it's a romance language. There are, it is sex specific. So, look,
well, we were
whatever reports, like the LA Times does it. I'm like, whatever, they pander. But I think the larger point though is that, right now the Democrats are a little bit lost in the wilderness. They will find their footing at some point. Largely because of Republican overstep or errors. 26 could be a good year for them. Although I can't definitively say that it will. And then 28, who knows? I mean, that's a lifetime from now, but the divisions are going to exist. And I think that a special candidate that wins by addition and not by subtraction is someone that is going to be a real threat in 2028. Whether that's a J.D. Vance or whether that's someone in the Democratic Party or someone else in the Republican Party, it's way too early to tell. But I'm ultimately an optimist, and the fact that people disagree doesn't disturb me. It's how they do it that I
But you also agreed that the statistics showing the level of increased disagreement was troubling, and that we don't know if it gets better.
Sure. No, I agree with that. I mean, Trump. The thing that people miss about Trump a lot is, and it's hard because the news media, they haven't figured him out yet. They get all twisted up on what he says.
I know.
Not what he does. Well, and it's fun. I mean, it's fun to watch him completely dominate a news cycle on stupid things like talking about Canada being the 51st state. Who cares? They're never going to be a state. Who cares?
Well, we can get to that. So I will just say that some people have said there's a candidate that can bring America together. We're looking at an 8 to 12 year period where that hasn't happened. Joe Biden said he was the candidate. That totally failed. I've asked 200 professors, name anyone in the political sphere that you think can bring both sides together. There's nobody that can name anybody on the sphere. J.D. Vance is a highly polarizing figure, so is Trump. So you're talking about a theoretical possibility when no one can name an actual person who could pull it off now. No, so we don't know if that person even exists. Is that fair?
I agree. I agree with you on that.
We don't. That's a maybe. May never happen.
Almost 250 years of surviving with some pretty significant disagreements in this country. That's what I go back on.
Sure.
To say that, I think that it certainly can be done. Maybe it has a lot to do with the fact that schools are no longer teaching American government and civics, and that people don't have a foundation for what it is. I mean, if you're not proud to be an American, you know what? That makes me, I won't say anything. It just makes me sad.
So they've done surveys showing that the highest amount of people who aren't proud to be an American are youth in the West. That means California.
I love it. That's great.
So we have the highest percentage of, I don't see myself as an American, according to surveys. Just a fact.
I thought you said the opposite. But so
no. We are the most unsupportive of American, according to polls. We've had the most number of cities force people to tear down American flags and take down American murals and tell people you can't wear American flags. You've also had the highest number of veterans and active duty military say that they don't want to support America while in service. We're off the charts when it comes to, as far as California.
Hey, Marcus, I got to scoot pretty quick. I'm going to be late for my
Well, let me ask you then real quick. Why is California secession unlikely?
Well, one, there really is no one. Well, I'll take it. I'll bite it a couple of different ways.
Sure.
The first is even qualifying it for the ballot, unless there are $10 to $15 million to professionally gather signatures, it's very, very challenging.
Got it.
And that's just the way that California sets up its initiative process.
Totally understand.
The second is that let's say it qualifies. Let's say that you're able to convince Californians that they'd be better off separate than together from the U.S. There really is no provision in the United States Constitution for a state to secede. They could say that they would, but the U.S. has to let them go. And the reality of even Democrats agreeing to let the world's fourth largest or fifth largest economy leave the United States for a state, by the way, that pays more than it receives from the federal government is just never, that's just, people would be voting against their own economic self-interest, and it will never happen. I do think, though, that measures like this, even the fact that they're being pushed, are healthy because it highlights dissatisfaction. Which is not a bad thing. And I think that the more, again, that which gets attention ultimately gets resolved. And I think that the more it's talked about, it forces even Democrats to deal with levels of dissatisfaction and at least propose solutions, and hope still springs eternal that we'll get a competitive governor's race in 2026 that will force the candidates to really campaign.
Before you go, I'd like to address a few of these if I could, just from what I've
heard.
Okay, yeah. So qualifying on the ballot, can't do it unless you got $10 to $15 million. They literally just brought on a multimillionaire. His name is Xavier Mitchell. He lives in Calabasas, owns 5 publicly traded companies, friends of Shirley Weber, nonprofit recognized by California, multimillionaire. He's on board, and they're going to launch a crypto coin, which they're estimating at 15 million. When we go to no provision in the U.S. Constitution to secede, because something's in the Constitution doesn't mean it's banned, like interstate commerce.
Oh, I didn't say it was banned. No, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a Supreme Court case called Texas versus White. It actually exists. It happened after the Civil War. It was decided by Salmon Chase, who was personally appointed by Abraham Lincoln. And it says you can secede with, quote, consent of the states. It does not say the amendment process. Erwin Chemerinsky is the top constitutional scholar in all of California and the most cited legal expert in all of America. He was asked about Calexit and said a simple majority vote of Congress could be all that's required to meet the consent thing, since it didn't say amendment. The only organization in America, according to the Constitution, who can say whether consent means amendment or not is the Supreme Court, which is now beholden to Donald Trump. So if you can get consent and you can get a simple majority of Congress, then according to the only Supreme Court case on this, which the Constitution says for all legal questions, it goes to the Supreme Court, is that you could legally secede. They've been saying that for whatever reason, that's just not getting out into the media. Finally, when you're looking at the case of Republicans won't let the California economy go, Republicans held a convention while Donald Trump was president in Congress, saying that California is the welfare queen and they're the donor state and they subsidize us. LA Times and San Francisco Chronicle's editorial boards were so flabbergasted by the amount of misinformation, they had to do editorials going, my God, you got the whole party saying the opposite of what's true? So how do we know that reps know that there is a path in the Constitution and they do have potentially 10 to 15 million? Does that change things?
Yeah, no, I think, believe it or not, I think you would have an easier time of California succeeding under Republicans than you would under Democrats. I don't think Democrats want to let California. Yeah. So, yeah, no, I mean, look, I've worked with Erwin Chemerinsky. I know him not well. He's brilliant. But look, it's getting a majority in. First of all, you would need 60 votes in the Senate to get anything through. Sure. I don't foresee that happening, but that is after you've qualified this and you've run a campaign to pass it.
Absolutely.
And look, that's a tall undertaking, and running a statewide campaign is never easy.
Well, I'll just point out the surveys from 2017, February 2017, Reuters, Ipsos, and Stanford University, two of the most reputable polling agencies. 32% were full-blown secession, 14.7% were willing to discuss, which puts you in the margin of error of 51%.
Except when you need a yes vote, you need to start in the 70s because you regress away from your highest number down. Having run a number of yes and no campaigns, you need that number, even charitably, if you can't get at least in the high 60s. So that still would be very, very problematic. And you could probably get there if you really ask the right questions to see what arguments hold. But again, passing a ballot measure in California is not an easy undertaking.
No, it's not. Although everybody said gay marriage would never pass and marijuana legalization would never pass because it took 2 to 3 times, multiple groups over a 10-year period, and all the experts were wrong, and both of those passed.
Well, let's be clear. Opposing gay marriage passed in California.
Opposing gay marriage.
Prop 8 was opposing gay marriage, and then it was overturned in the courts.
Right. So, and then gay marriage got legalized after that under Gavin Newsom, and with millions of dollars from a Bitcoin investor out of New York who came in as an angel investor on a California initiative.
That was largely symbolic, though, at that point.
True, but it also moved the needle in California to embrace gay marriage a few years later. Same thing with Sean Parker and marijuana. These were highly controversial issues until one angel donor from tech came in, dropped $3 to $5 million on both of them, and then they passed.
Well, I wish you luck. If having worked on a number of statewide initiatives, you learn more about yourself and you learn more about the voters by getting out there and rubbing elbows. And you'll hear things that people will say, and you'll be like, I never thought about that before.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The amount of people that are upset at Donald Trump for saying, I know the people died in the Palisades fire, but we're not sure we want to help, has really enraged the LA population and put a lot of people into supporting CalExit. That's largely why he got the media boost recently. But I want to say thank you for coming out. Thank you for your time. I'll send you a copy of this. Give me a few hours and I'll email you a copy.
Let's talk again. There's lots to talk about. Thank you, Marcus. I enjoyed this.
Thank you so much.
See you later.
I'll see you soon. Bye-bye. Thank you.